Kofi just lost his job. He had $10 left for his father's medicine. But when he saw this homeless lady, he gave it all away. He thought he was broke. He didn't know that exactly 600 seconds later, his kindness would trigger a miracle that would stun the entire city. Don't scroll. The ending is life-changing. In the beating, sun-drenched heart of Accra, Ghana, the dust doesn't just settle, it tells stories. This is the story of Kofi, a man whose hands were calloused from years of honest labor but whose heart remained as soft as the morning mist. Kofi was the pillar of his family, a young man who worked as a lead technician at a local textile factory. For 5 years, he was the first to arrive and the last to leave. Every penny he earned was a brick in the wall of protection he built around his elderly, ailing father and his younger sister, Effia, who dreamed of becoming a doctor. But on this specific Tuesday, the sky over the factory felt heavier than usual. The humid air was thick with the scent of unwashed cotton and impending doom. As the noon whistle blew, Kofi was summoned not to the break room, but to the glass-walled office of Mr. Mensah, a man whose heart was as cold as the air conditioning he sat in. Without a word of appreciation for Kofi's 5 years of sweat, Mensah slid a yellow envelope across the mahogany desk. "The economy is shifting, Kofi. We are automating. Your services are no longer required," Mensah said, his voice devoid of any human vibration. Inside that envelope wasn't a severance package. It wasn't a bonus. It was a single, crumpled $10 bill, his final settlement for the week. Kofi stood frozen. The $10 felt like lead in his pocket. As he walked out of the factory gates for the last time, the bustling sounds of the Makola market rose up to meet him, but he heard nothing but the roaring silence of failure. How would he tell his father that the medicine for his heart would have to wait? How would he look Effia in the eye when she asked for her school bus fare? He was a jobless man in a city that had no mercy for the unemployed. As he navigated through the vibrant chaos of the marketplace, the sights and smells were overwhelming. He passed stalls overflowing with bright, juicy oranges, exactly like the ones in the background of his life's most pivotal moment. He passed vendors shouting about the freshest tilapia and the spiciest jollof. His own stomach groaned, a sharp, twisting pain that reminded him he hadn't eaten since the previous night. He looked at that $10 bill. It was his last $10. It was the difference between a small bag of rice for his family or another night of drinking water to mask the hunger. He was heading toward a small grocery stall when he saw her. Tucked away in a small patch of shade, leaning against a stack of crates, sat an elderly woman. She looked like a shadow forgotten by the sun. Her skin was a beautiful, deep ebony, but it was mapped with the wrinkles of 1,000 hardships. Her head was wrapped in a faded, dusty cloth, and her eyes, milky with the onset of cataracts, seemed to be staring at a world no one else could see. Beside her sat a piece of tattered cardboard with the words, "Please help," scrawled in charcoal. Kofi watched as the world moved past her. Wealthy shoppers in shimmering kente cloth stepped around her as if she were a stone in the road. Businessmen on their phones didn't even glance down. Kofi looked at his $10. He looked at his own worn-out boots. He thought about his father. But then he looked at the woman's trembling hands. He realized that while he had lost his job, he still had his youth, his strength, and his hope. This woman had nothing but the cardboard she sat on. In a moment that defied all logic, Kofi felt a surge of warmth in his chest. It was as if his mother's voice was whispering in his ear. "Kindness is the only seed that grows in a desert." Kofi didn't just toss the money. He approached her with the respect one gives a queen. As captured in the image that would soon go viral, Kofi knelt in the red dust of the market. He leaned forward, his white collared shirt contrasting against the vibrant umbrellas of the market, and gently extended his hand. He placed the stack of bills, his absolute last bit of security, into her weathered palm. The moment their skin touched, a hush seemed to fall over the noisy market. The woman's head snapped up. She didn't look like a beggar anymore. Her eyes cleared for a split second, glowing with a sharp, piercing intelligence. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she gripped Kofi's hand with the strength of a much younger person. "The clock has started, Kofi of Accra," she whispered, her voice sounding like the rustle of ancient leaves. 10 minutes. Do not turn back. Walk toward the old clock tower and do not stop until the air smells of jasmine." Kofi gave a bittersweet smile, assuming the poor woman was lost in a dream of her own. He stood up, his pockets now completely empty, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. He turned away and started to walk, unaware that at that very moment, exactly 600 seconds were ticking down on a digital clock in a high-rise office across the city, and a team of men in dark suits were scrambling toward their vehicles. He had no idea that helping this one, Beggar, was the final key to a lock he didn't even know existed. The dust of the Makola market seemed to shimmer in a way Kofi had never noticed before. As he took his first 10 steps away from the elderly woman, a strange, heavy silence began to ripple outward from the spot where she sat. It was as if the chaotic shouting of the fishmongers and the rhythmic pounding of fufu in the distance were being muffled by an invisible velvet curtain. Kofi checked his old, cracked wristwatch. It was exactly 12:00 p.m. The sun was at its zenith, a golden eye watching his every move. He didn't know it, but the woman's words, "The clock has started," were not the ramblings of the elderly. They were a mechanical reality. For the first 60 seconds, reality hit Kofi like a physical blow. His hand instinctively reached into his pocket, searching for the familiar texture of the $10 bill, but he found only lint and a small hole in the fabric. He was a man with nothing. No job to return to tomorrow, no money to buy his father's digitalis heart pills, and no pride left to shield him from the whispers of the neighbors. He felt light, dangerously light, as if the wind could pick him up and blow him away into the Atlantic Ocean. But as he looked back one last time, he saw the woman still staring at him. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his shadow, which seemed to be growing longer even though it was noon. By the third minute, Kofi reached the edge of the textile district. This was where the jobless man usually felt the most pain, seeing the heavy trucks loaded with fabric he used to carry. But something changed. The smell of diesel and rotting fruit was suddenly replaced by a sharp, piercing fragrance. It was jasmine, sweet, thick, and royal. It was a scent that didn't belong in a dusty marketplace. Kofi stopped, his heart racing. He remembered the woman's instruction. "Do not stop until the air smells of jasmine." He looked around, confused. There were no flowers here, only rusted corrugated iron roofs and sun-baked bricks. 5 minutes had passed. Kofi was now halfway to the old clock tower. Suddenly, a strange phenomenon occurred. The bustling crowd, which usually moved like a fast-flowing river, began to slow down. People stopped mid-sentence. A vendor holding a crate of oranges stayed frozen, his eyes wide, looking toward the main road. The only thing moving was Kofi. He felt a chill run down his spine. Why was everyone looking at the horizon? Why had the birds stopped chirping? It was as if the 10 minutes later, promise was a physical force bending the world around him. At the 7-minute mark, the silence was shattered by a sound Kofi would never forget. It wasn't the roar of a jet, but the synchronized, high-pitched hum of high-performance engines. From the north gate of the city, 3 jet-black SUVs with tinted windows and silver rims tore through the dust, moving with a precision that suggested military training. They didn't slow down for the potholes, they glided over them. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Kofi watched, mesmerized. He thought perhaps a politician was passing through, but the SUVs didn't have government plates. Instead, they bore a small, elegant gold G, the same logo the woman had hidden on a small ring under her rags. The clock tower was now in sight. Kofi's breath was coming in ragged gasps. Hunger was forgotten. Fear was forgotten. He was at the center of a storm he didn't understand. The SUVs braked simultaneously, encircling the clock tower square. Doors flew open, and 6 men in sharp, charcoal-gray suits stepped out. They didn't look like thugs, they looked like elite security for a world leader. One of them, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, held a tablet. He looked at the screen, then looked at Kofi, who was standing there in his sweat-stained white shirt, looking every bit the jobless man he was. The man with the scar nodded. He spoke into a wrist-mounted radio. Target located at the 9-minute mark. Subject is exactly where the matriarch said he would be. Initiate the reveal. Exactly 600 seconds after the $10 bill had left Kofi's hand, the 10th minute arrived. The man with the scar walked toward Kofi. The market crowd, now thawed from their shock, began to gather in a wide circle, their phones out, recording a moment that would soon be the top trending story in Africa. The man stopped 3 feet from Kofi and did something that made Kofi's knees buckle. He bowed. Not a slight nod, but a deep, respectful bow. "Mr. Kofi," the man said, his voice echoing through the square. "10 minutes ago, you gave your last bit of hope to a woman you thought was a beggar. You didn't know that she is the founder of the G Global Foundation, and she has spent 30 years looking for a heart that wouldn't break under the weight of poverty." He handed Kofi a leather briefcase. "Inside is not just the medicine for your father or the fees for your sister. Inside is the deed to the factory that fired you this morning. You are no longer an employee, sir. You are the owner, and your private transportation is waiting at the terminal." Kofi looked at his hands, the same hands that had touched the beggar just 10 minutes ago. He realized then that the woman wasn't changing his life. She was simply returning the light he had given her in the dark. The transition was so fast it felt like a fever dream. One moment, Kofi was a jobless man standing in the dirt with nothing but a broken heart. The next, he was sitting in the back of a luxury SUV, the scent of expensive leather replacing the smell of street fry bread. As the convoy sped back toward the textile factory, Kofi looked at the leather briefcase resting on his lap. He didn't open it yet. He didn't need to. The weight of it told him that his days of begging for overtime were over. When the 3 black SUVs pulled up to the factory gates, the same security guard who had rudely pushed Kofi out just 2 hours ago stepped forward, ready to shout. But when he saw the gold G logo and the professional security detail stepping out, his jaw dropped. He didn't recognize the man in the back seat until the door opened. Kofi stepped out, still in his white shirt, but his posture had changed. He wasn't slouching under the weight of poverty anymore. He walked with the quiet authority of a man who had passed the ultimate test. Kofi headed straight for the executive elevator, bypassing the workers who stood frozen with their mouths open. He reached the top floor, the floor he was never allowed to step on. He pushed open the double oak doors of Mr. Mensah's office. Mr. Mensah was mid-laugh, swirling a glass of expensive scotch, celebrating the money he saved by firing the staff. When he saw Kofi, he turned red. "You, how dare you come back here? I told you you're finished, security." Kofi didn't say a word. He simply walked to the mahogany desk and placed the deed from the briefcase directly over Mensah's scotch glass. Mensah's eyes scanned the document. His face went from red to a ghostly, pale white. The paper was clear. The G Global Foundation had purchased 100% of the factory's shares in a lightning-fast dark pool trade exactly 8 minutes ago. The new owner wasn't a bank or a billionaire from overseas. The new owner was the man standing in front of him in a sweat-stained shirt. "This is impossible," Mensah stammered, the glass trembling in his hand. "Why would they give this to you?" At that moment, the office door opened again. The beggar walked in, but she wasn't hunched over anymore. She was dressed in a stunning, regal emerald green gown, her silver hair styled with elegance. She walked with a grace that commanded the room. "He was given this because he did what you couldn't, Mr. Mensah," she said, her voice now clear and powerful. "He saw a human being where you only saw a cost. For 30 years, I have lived on these streets in disguise, looking for a successor. Many gave me coins out of pity. Some gave me food out of guilt. But Kofi gave me his last $10 out of love. He sacrificed his own survival for a stranger's comfort." She turned to Kofi, a motherly smile warming her face. "Kofi, the factory was never the goal. This was a test of stewardship. A man who can manage $10 with such mercy is the only man I can trust to manage 10 million. Kofi looked at Mr. Mensah, who was now sweating profusely, waiting for the axe to fall. Kofi thought about the 5 years of insults. He thought about his father's medicine. He had the power to destroy this man's life with a single sentence. But Kofi remembered the feeling of that $10 leaving his hand. He remembered the peace it gave him. "Mr. Mensah," Kofi said, his voice calm, "you told me the company was downsizing. You were right. We are downsizing the greed. You are fired, effective immediately. But unlike you, I won't give you a crumpled envelope. You will receive a fair severance because unlike you, I know what it feels like to have nothing." As Mensah was escorted out by the men in suits, the lady in green placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder. "The private life you are about to lead isn't about the cars or the planes, Kofi. It's about the reach of your hand. Are you ready to change the rest of Africa?" Kofi looked out the window at the workers below. He didn't see employees, he saw his brothers and sisters. "I'm ready," he whispered. Exactly 10 minutes after helping a beggar, Kofi wasn't just a rich man. He was a man with a mission. The black SUV glided through the narrow, unpaved alleys of Kofi's neighborhood, its tires kicking up the same red dust Kofi had walked through in despair only hours ago. Children stopped playing with their makeshift tires to stare at the gleaming vehicle. To them, such a car only belonged to politicians or movie stars. They didn't know that inside sat the boy who used to share his meager crusts of bread with them. Kofi stepped out in front of his father's small, crumbling concrete house. The corrugated iron roof was rusted orange and the porch was sagging. This was the where, the place where his poverty had felt like a cage. He held the leather briefcase tightly. His heart hammered against his ribs harder than it had in the boardroom. Money was easy to handle. Family was different. He pushed open the creaking wooden door. The air inside was cool and smelled of menthol and old newsprint. His father, Bako, sat in a worn-out armchair, his breath shallow and wheezing. His sister, Effia, was hunched over a small kerosene lamp, trying to study from a textbook with missing pages. "Kofi," Effia looked up, her eyes red from the smoke. "You're back early. Did the boss give the advance for Papa's medicine?" Kofi couldn't speak. He looked at his father's pale face. He thought about how close he came to losing them. He walked over to the small wooden table and clicked open the briefcase. Inside wasn't just paper. There were vials of the expensive heart medication his father needed, fresh, chilled, and ready. There was a thick envelope of cash for their immediate needs, but at the very bottom lay a small golden key with the same G logo. "Papa," Kofi whispered, kneeling by the armchair just as he had knelt before the beggar. "The medicine is here, and we are never going to be hungry again." Bako reached out a trembling hand, touching the vials. "How, my son, did you sell your soul to the devil for this?" "No, Papa," Kofi smiled through tears. "I gave my last $10 to a woman who had nothing. It turns out she was the one who owned everything." Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. It was the woman from the market, now dressed in her regal emerald gown, standing in the doorway of their humble shack. The neighbors gathered outside, whispering in awe. She walked toward Bako and bowed her head. "You raised a king," she said softly. "Many men have wealth, but few have a kingdom in their hearts. Kofi didn't just pass a test of money, he passed a test of character that my family has been conducting for 3 generations. She turned to Kofi. The golden key in that briefcase isn't for the factory, it's for the estate on the hill. Your father will have the best doctors in the country by sunset. And Effia, your medical school is already paid for, in full. As the sun began to set over Accra, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, a moving van arrived to take their few precious belongings. Kofi stood on the porch one last time. He looked at the spot where he used to sit and worry about his future. He realized that his jobless status was the greatest blessing he ever received. If he hadn't been fired, he would have been inside the factory, busy and distracted. He would have never walked past that woman. He would have never reached into his pocket for that last $10. As they drove away toward their new life, Kofi looked out the window. He saw another young man, looking tired and broken, walking home from work. Kofi tapped the driver on the shoulder. "Stop the car," he said. He reached into his pocket, no longer empty, and pulled out a bill. He knew that the cycle of kindness didn't end with him. It was just beginning. The first week of Kofi's leadership at the factory felt like a whirlwind of justice. He had already reinstated the 3 elderly workers Mr. Mensah had cruelly dismissed, and he had doubled the safety budget for the floor workers. But while Kofi was building a sanctuary of fairness, a storm was brewing in the dark corners of the city. Mr. Mensah, stripped of his title and his scotch, was not a man who went quietly into the night. He was a man consumed by the why. Why did a jobless man deserve the throne he had occupied for a decade? It was a humid Thursday evening. Kofi was staying late, personally inspecting the new looms he had ordered for the staff. The factory was quiet, the only sound being the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, a reminder of the 10 minutes that changed his life. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. A heavy metallic smell began to fill the air. It wasn't the smell of cotton. It was the smell of burning oil and chemicals. Kofi grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the main breaker room. As the beam of light cut through the darkness, he saw a figure slipping through the back exit. It was a man he recognized, the former head of security, someone still loyal to Mensah. Beside the main generator lay a cluster of industrial incendiary devices. Mensah didn't just want his job back. He wanted to burn the G-Global legacy to the ground so Kofi would be blamed for the catastrophe. Kofi had 2 choices. He could call the police and wait, letting the factory and the livelihoods of 500 families go up in flames. Or he could risk the life he had just gained to save the place that had once discarded him. Without hesitation, Kofi grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher. He fought through the thick, black smoke, his white shirt, now a symbol of his new status, becoming stained once again with the soot of labor. He wasn't thinking like a billionaire. He was thinking like the man who had laid bricks for 12 hours a day. He hacked at the burning cables, his lungs burning, his eyes stinging. Just as the flames began to lick the ceiling, Kofi managed to trigger the emergency suppression system. A rain of chemical foam doused the fire, saving the building but leaving Kofi collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. As the backup lights hummed to life, a shadow fell over him. It was the beggar woman, the matriarch. She wasn't wearing her emerald gown tonight. She was back in her simple, dignified wraps, her eyes glowing with a fierce pride. "You could have run, Kofi," she said, helping him to his feet. "The insurance would have paid for a new building. Your bank account wouldn't have felt a scratch." Kofi wiped the soot from his forehead. "The building isn't the factory, Mother. The people inside are. If this place burned, 500 fathers wouldn't have a way to feed their children tonight. I couldn't let them feel what I felt on that Tuesday morning." Minutes later, the police arrived, led by the evidence Kofi's new security team had gathered. Mr. Mensah was found in a nearby hotel, his suitcases packed with stolen company files, waiting for the smoke to rise. When they led him away in handcuffs, he saw Kofi standing at the factory gate, covered in ash but standing tall. Mensah screamed, "You're still just a laborer. You'll always be covered in dirt." Kofi looked at his blackened hands and then at the sunrise beginning to peek over the horizon. "Dirt can be washed away, Mr. Mensah, but the stain of a cold heart stays forever." The matriarch stepped forward, handing Kofi a fresh white shirt. "The test is over, Kofi. You didn't just give your money, you gave your breath. Now it's time for the world to see what a king from the streets can truly build." As the morning shift workers began to arrive, they didn't see a boss in a suit. They saw a man who had bled for their machines. They cheered, a sound louder than any jet engine, echoing across the streets of Accra. Word of the miracle of Accra spread like wildfire across the continent. Social media was flooded with images of the young man in the white shirt, the jobless man who had become the owner of the very empire that discarded him. But with great fame comes a different kind of predator. As Kofi's factory began to outproduce every other textile plant in West Africa, it caught the attention of Vanguard Global, a massive multinational corporation known for buying local businesses, stripping them of their soul, and replacing workers with cold, unfeeling machines. Kofi was invited to a prestigious global economic summit in a luxury hotel overlooking the Atlantic. He arrived not in his work-stained shirt, but in a tailored suit of deep indigo, woven from the very fabric his own workers had produced. He was no longer just Kofi, he was a symbol of African hope. As he walked through the marble halls, he felt the weight of the golden G pin on his lapel. In a private, soundproof suite on the top floor, he was met by Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Vanguard Global. Thorne didn't offer a handshake, he offered a check. $100 million, Kofi, Thorne said, leaning back in his leather chair. That is the price for your factory. You can take your father to the finest hospitals in Switzerland. You can buy 10 private jets. You can leave the dust of the market behind forever. All you have to do is sign, and my machines will take over the labor. Kofi looked at the check. The zeros seemed to vibrate before his eyes. $100 million. It was more money than 1,000 lifetimes of last $10 bills. He thought about the leaking roof of his old house. He thought about the struggle to breathe in the smoke during the sabotage. He could walk away right now and never have to smell the scent of industrial oil again. He could be a king of leisure. But then he looked out the window at the city below. He saw the tiny specks of people moving through the marketplace. He saw the colorful umbrellas where the oranges were sold. He realized that if he signed this paper, 500 families would be back on that street, clutching their own last $10, waiting for a miracle that might never come. Thorne wasn't buying a building. He was buying the future of Kofi's people. Kofi pushed the check back across the table. His voice was steady, rooted in the red earth of his home. "Mr. Thorne, you are a man who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing," Kofi said. "You see my workers as costs to be eliminated. I see them as the heartbeat of this nation. My factory is not for sale because you cannot put a price on the dignity of a man who has work to do." Thorne's face darkened. "You're a fool, Kofi. By tomorrow, I will use my influence to cut off your supply chains. I will crush you until you are begging in that market again." Just as Thorne rose to threaten him, the door opened. The matriarch walked in, her presence filling the room with an ancient, undeniable power. She wasn't carrying a sign or wearing rags. She carried a tablet that showed the live stock market feed of Vanguard Global. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a low thunder. "While you were busy trying to bribe my successor, the G Global Foundation was busy. We have just acquired a controlling interest in your shipping lanes. If you touch one thread of Kofi's factory, I will ground your entire fleet before the sun sets." Thorne froze, his power evaporating in an instant. He realized too late that the beggar he had likely stepped over a dozen times in his career was the one holding his leash. Kofi walked out of the summit and went straight back to the factory. He didn't go to his office. He went to the break room. He sat with the weavers, the loaders, and the cleaners. He told them about the offer, and he told them why he said no. "I didn't give that money to a lady in the market so I could become a billionaire," Kofi told them, his voice echoing through the rafters. "I gave it so I could find my way back to you. We are not just making fabric, we are weaving a new Africa." As the workers cheered, the matriarch watched from the shadows, a single tear of joy tracing a path through the wrinkles of her face. The test was truly over. Kofi had chosen his people over the gold. The atmosphere in the central market of Accra was electric. It was exactly 1 year to the day since Kofi had knelt in the dirt and handed over his last $10. But today, the market wasn't a place of desperation. It was a place of celebration. Kofi had organized the Festival of First Fruits, a massive event where every vendor was given a grant to upgrade their stalls, and every beggar was given a seat at a long, white-clothed table filled with the finest food in Ghana. Kofi arrived not in a convoy, but on foot. He wore the same style of white-collared shirt he had worn on that fateful Tuesday, but today it was made of the finest organic cotton from his own factory. As he walked through the crowd, people didn't cheer for his money, they cheered for his name. He walked straight to the corner where the orange stalls stood, to the exact spot where he had met the woman who changed his life. The matriarch was waiting for him. She was sitting on a simple wooden chair, looking out at the joy she had helped create. She motioned for Kofi to sit beside her. "You have done well, Kofi," she said, her voice sounding like a soft melody over the noise of the festival. "You didn't just build a factory, you built a community. But there is one final why you haven't asked. You haven't asked why I was in this specific market, on that specific day, waiting for a man like you." Kofi looked at her, his brow furrowing. "I thought it was a test for any good man, mother." The matriarch reached into a small silk pouch and pulled out an old, faded photograph. It was black and white, the edges frayed by decades of tropical humidity. She handed it to Kofi. His breath caught. In the photo was a young woman, strikingly beautiful, standing in front of a small village school. She had the same eyes as Kofi, the same determined set of the jaw. "This is my mother," Kofi whispered, his hand trembling. "She died when I was just a boy. My father said she was a teacher who believed that kindness was the only currency that never devalued." The matriarch nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Her name was Amara, and she was my younger sister. 30 years ago, we had a falling out. I wanted to build an empire of gold. She wanted to build an empire of souls. She left the family wealth behind to live among the people, to teach, and to love. I spent decades growing bitter and rich until I realized that she was the one who was truly wealthy." Kofi felt the world spinning. The woman he had helped, the beggar, was his own great-aunt. "I didn't choose you at random, Kofi," she continued. "I had been watching you from afar for years. I saw you work those double shifts. I saw you care for your father. But I needed to know if you carried Amara's blood or the greed of the world. On that Tuesday, I arranged for the factory to downsize. I wanted to see what you would do when you had nothing left but your character. When you gave me that $10, I didn't see a jobless man. I saw my sister's spirit living in you." Kofi looked around at the market, at the people eating, at his sister Effia laughing with her friends, and at his father Bako, who was sitting in a place of honor, breathing easily with his new heart. He realized that his act of kindness wasn't a transaction with a stranger. It was a homecoming. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the marketplace, the matriarch stood up. She took the golden G pin from her own robe and pinned it to Kofi's shirt. The G Global Foundation is now yours, Kofi. Not just the factory, but the entire mission. You are no longer the jobless man. You are the guardian. Kofi stood up and looked out at the thousands of people. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single $10 bill, the same amount that started it all. He didn't keep it. He handed it to a young boy who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Keep this," Kofi told the boy. "And remember, never let the world make you hard. Your heart is the only thing they can't take away." The boy took the money and ran into the crowd, his face lit up with a dream. Kofi watched him go, knowing that the story of the last $10 would be told for generations. It wasn't a story about a private jet or $1 million. It was a story about 10 minutes that proved that in the heart of Africa, a single act of mercy is louder than 1,000 engines. If you believe that a single act of kindness can change a life, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of hope. Comment "miracle" below if you would have given your last $10 to help someone in need. Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder that their harvest is coming. See you in the next video.